New business. All right, Planning and Zoning Board will come to order. It's 6 o'clock, January 27th. Would you call the roll, please?
Chairperson Russell?
That's you, Lamar.
Who?
Chairperson
Russell.
Chairperson Russell.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Vice Chairperson Price?
Present.
Board Member Denny?
Present.
Board Member Denelcore?
Present.
Board Member Dr. Miller?
Present.
And Board Member Mr. Stroud?
Present. Okay, thank you all for being here, and I hope you've done your homework, read the ordinance. It's a good piece of work we've got to do tonight, and I think we'll have a good meeting. First order of business then after roll call is to ask if there's any public participation anybody out there who wants to speak on a matter that we're possibly not covering tonight. And if so, we won't be able to take any action, but we'll hear it. Is there any public input out there? Okay, hearing no indication, we'll go on to new business and look at approval of the minutes for December the 9th. You have those minutes in your possession. Are there any additions or corrections or amendments to those minutes? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have no additions or corrections and would like to move that we accept the minutes of the last meeting as they stand.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. It's been made and seconded to approve the minutes as stand. Would you call the roll, please?
Can I get the names of the first and second person who?
Don Price made the motion.
Michael Miller, second motion.
Thank you.
Well, that's a good point. Before she calls the roll, when we make motions, just say your name because we're all masked up. So like, for instance, John Price moves and make your motion. That way we'll speed ourselves along.
Thank you.
Okay, where are we? Are we still calling the roll? Or have we called it?
Yep.
We're done?
Can we just do all in favor?
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved unanimously. Our next item of business is comprehensive plan amendment, and it's consideration of the ordinance amending subdivision, division, and lot splits to authorize certain unimproved lot splits occurring prior to March 16th, 2010. And so we're going to go through that ordinance. Before we get into it, I'm going to ask David. Dave, is this ordinance, I know it's about lot splits, but is this the beginning of the cleaning up or clearing up of all those lots that have clouds on the title because of they're in a commercial zone?
Are you talking about the non-conforming rezoning that we just did?
Yeah, no,
Those are not the same.
yeah, no, this is a different issue. This is not part of the 700 parcels that we're dealing with. This is a separate issue.
Okay. We're just cleaning up this part of the ordinance. Okay, then we'll ask you to take us through the report on that
Sure.
subdivision.
There's not really a formal presentation. Generally, what we're here to discuss is that in 2010, we passed Ordinance 03-2010, which revised the city's plating process. And it established abbreviated lot split procedures for the division. And then in 2017, Ordinance 08-2017 was passed, and it revised the longstanding definitions of subdivision to include division of a tract of land into 3 or more.
Ma'am, I don't know if it's my hearing or you're speaking, but could you take your mask off when we're talking in the mic?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah,
as well.
me too.
All right.
There you go.
Okay, so picking up from 2017, as I was saying, Ordinance 08-2017 revised the city's longstanding definition of a subdivision and included language that said a division of tract of land into 3 or more lots or parcels for the purposes of transferring of ownership or building development. And that ordinance also established the lot split and lot line adjustment process. Generally, the way that it works for the city is you do a pre-application meeting with city staff, and then you would submit a formal application to include all the required documentation. After that, the city staff would review, and then after that, we would have a public hearing in front of this board, and then generally it would move to council. And then the affected property owners would be noticed, and then it would be recorded with either the property appraiser or the Brevard clerk. What we're finding is a lot of people are skipping just to step 6. They're recording this and not going through the city process. So this ordinance would, I guess it would provide some criteria for lots that were split prior to the date noted, which is March 16th, 2010. Okay, so on the screen and in your packets is a listing of the criteria that you guys would, city would judge this by.
So let's see if I learned this correctly. What this does is compel the owner to go through the city process for a lot split rather than just simply going up to the courthouse, recording it and dusting off his hands,
Right.
and that's it.
That is supposed to be, in general, that is the process. You're supposed to come to the city first, do a pre-application meeting, where we make sure that you fit the criteria and other things are in line. And then you go through the rest of the steps. And the final step would be recording. But what we're finding is sometimes people are recording and we are not aware.
Yeah, this ordinance is really, I call it cleaning up the sins of the past. We've had a lot of property owners who have just gone right, just get a survey, go out and get a survey. They go down to the property appraiser's office with the survey and record it. And what happens is the property appraiser goes ahead and I'm sure you've all been on the property appraiser website. The property appraiser go ahead and records it, and they have rather than one parcel, they get it surveyed, meets and bounds survey, and they submit it and they record it. Now they have 2 parcels for purposes of the property appraiser's office. Well, the problem we're having is that oftentimes these newly created lots, since they haven't gone through the city process, we require, anytime a lot is divided, we're supposed to go through the city subdivision process because we check things. Like a big thing would be, are these newly created lots, they meet our minimum dimensional requirements for zoning?
Right.
The property appraiser doesn't ask any of those kind of questions. They just go ahead and record whatever survey that's presented, that's put down on their counter in front of them. And what's happened, not all the time, but what can happen is these new parcels don't meet our zoning requirements. We would check that if they go through the city subdivision process. But if they don't, we have these lots out there that are substandard and they don't meet zoning. And so when they come in, someone comes in to pull a building permit to build a house on one of these lots, guess what? It screeches to a halt. And then we start backtracking and we find out you didn't go through the city process, and it becomes a real quagmire.
So the person has a lot they can't build on,
Correct.
and they don't get a permit.
Correct.
So they're stuck until they make whatever arrangements they got to make to fix it.
That is correct. That doesn't happen all the time, but it happens sometimes. And it happens more often than you would think.
So who fixes it? Does the city fix it or
Well-
do they fix it?
That's what this ordinance is going to attempt to, well, the city usually has to fix it, one way or the other. But this ordinance is essentially saying, okay, we're going to recognize all of these unauthorized lot splits out there. And we're going to there's a process to recognize that. However, you have to meet certain minimum criteria. And those are the criteria that are up in front of you on your monitors. I can't count it from this angle. I think there's 6 or 7 maybe.
If they don't meet the minimum area, what do? Just approve them after the fact?
No. If they don't meet the minimum criteria up here that you have in the proposed ordinance, then they are not going to be eligible to be, I don't know what's the best term to use, Anthony. I don't want to say grandfathered, but
This, back up just a little
Yeah,
bit.
yep.
Just to explain, like, how we got here. Cities have the right to regulate the subdivision of land, the division of land. If somebody wants to take one parcel and make it 2, 3, 4, 5 different lots, the city has the right to regulate that. And since 1962, 63, when the city was incorporated, as far as we could tell, the city always required property owners to come in for approval of a plat if they were going to divide their land into 2 or more new lots. What we found out through the years is that some property owners didn't follow the rules. But in 2010, the city council made it easier for property owners to divide their lands into 2 lots. That's called a lot split. So in 2010, the city council relaxed the platting requirement and said, property owner, if you want to divide your property into 2 lots, no more than 2 lots, there's a lot split process that you have to follow. And then the council can approve a lot split rather than requiring the property owner to go through a full-blown plat process, which is far more time-consuming and expensive. Okay, so since 2010, property owners are supposed to come to the city if they want to divide their property into no more than 2 lots and get a lot split approval by the council. In 2010, but there are some property owners that have divided their lots, done a lot split prior to 2010, that they never received plat approval, and there's no record of them ever getting any city approval for dividing their land. This ordinance would provide a partial amnesty for those property owners that have divided their land into no more than 2 lots, provided they meet the conditions in this ordinance, which they've indicated are requirements. And those requirements include that the lots that were created actually meet the minimum lot size requirements and other requirements that we have in here. And if they meet those requirements, the city will recognize those lot splits for permitting purposes, because that's what it's all about. The clerk of the court will record any old deed dividing land, regardless if the city approves it. That's one thing. But the city approval for that division of land is necessary for permitting purposes. The city is not in the business of recognizing for permitting purposes illegally divided land or illegal lot splits, because you have to come in and you have to get approval by the city so they make sure that dimensions are adequate, size is adequate, there's proper ingress and egress. So again, this ordinance provides some limited amnesty in situations where there was an unauthorized lot split, no more than two lots created by a property owner, and they meet all of these requirements. The amnesty does not apply to any lot split that may have occurred illegally after March 16th, 2010, because on that date, the lot split ordinance, the relaxation of the subdivision of land requirements, the plating requirements was adopted by the city council, and people should have come forward and sought a lot split after that date. So if those property owners that have illegally created a lot split after March 16, 2010 will still be required to come in for an after the fact lot split approval by the council.
Yeah, that's good. And I'd like to add one more thing, Lamar. On paragraph B, the bottom of page 4, and Anthony used a word that I like. He said limited amnesty. If they created lots that do not meet the minimum lot size requirements, they're not good. This ordinance is not going to help them. And if it does meet the minimum lot size requirements, they are still eligible. So we're not trying to reward people who are creating illegally sized lots. That's not what this ordinance is about.
So if
So
you've
it's
got
limited.
So if you've got a non-conforming lot, then you got to go buy some property to make your lot big enough to become conforming. Is that the bottom line?
They're going to have to find some way to meet those minimum dimensional requirements. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And here's the dilemma too, that's just throw this out there just so you have this fact, that some of these unauthorized lot splits occurred when the property was owned by subsequent, I mean, not subsequent, but prior property owners. So you have arguably innocent purchases of property, acquiring what they think is a legal lot in the city, to find out that when they come to the city for a permit, Dave's saying, we have no record of this lot split ever being authorized. So it creates a hang up on the permitting process. So you got this innocent purchaser of property with this unauthorized lot split. So we're trying to afford some relief to those innocent purchases of property that, provided the lots that they purchased meet these requirements A through E. And you'll see one of the requirements is that the current owner of the property that's affected is not the owner of the lot at the time the unauthorized lot split occurred. So if somebody created an unauthorized lot split 15 years ago and they still own the property today, they have to come in for an after the fact lot split permit. They don't get the limited amnesty.
Okay, so that works if the area requirements are met, but if the area requirements are not met, then none of these paragraphs are going to be helpful to that,
Then you got a problem.
to the innocent buyer.
Right. You have a lot that doesn't meet some of the bulk requirements of the city, like lot size. They have now a non-conforming lot. And
So then
they're
the
not allowed to build.
buyer and the realtor get their attorneys together to figure out who's going to fix that.
Yeah. They obviously
That's a
either
possibility.
didn't do the due diligence required to verify that the lot met the city's requirements, right? Or they were misled or whatever, and they have to deal with it. I mean, they acquired a pig in the poke under that scenario that you mentioned, right?
So if I read this right, what we're putting in place is a way to fix, properly document the lot split. If it's a good split.
It's a good split.
i.e.
Exactly.
meets the right requirements.
Right. Rather
If
than,
it's a bad split, we're a bystander and you, the owner, get to go fix your problem. Is that the way it works?
I think that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Basically, when you get that innocent purchaser of property, they got a lot split that frankly the city would have likely approved. And so they get the green light to get their permits. And rather than have to go in for an after the fact lot split by the city. So it's streamlining for those innocent property owners versus, those property owners that didn't play by the rule and still own the property. They need to come back to get the approval that they should have gotten in the first place before they split the lot.
Okay. Let me just start down with Susan. Do you have any other questions you want to add to the mix, Susan?
Not at this time. I thought it was pretty clear cut.
Okay. How about Nancy? Do you have any questions you want to add to the mix?
Just one. I'm just wondering, do you have any estimate of how many people might be in a bad position? Find that they have illegal lots? Is it a large number or?
I don't have a number off the top of my head. Anecdotally, we do get calls from people who do their due diligence and, they might realize that their lot might not meet the minimum requirements. And then, they know what path they need to take, but I don't have a number off the top of my head.
I just wondered if it was gonna get a bunch of things.
If I were to venture a guess, I would say there's probably less than 20. So it's not a widespread issue that we're aware of now. That's a guess. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah, okay.
We're not talking about developers coming in and doing this.
This is really for, as Anthony said, this is really for, I don't want to call them duped. This is for folks who are coming in, they thought they had one thing, they don't. And for no cause of their own, they've found themselves in a bad spot. And we're trying to provide some relief here.
If I understood you correctly, Anthony, those lots may very well be recorded with the county. They are recorded with the county, right?
They are recorded, yeah.
So there would be no reason for these people to think otherwise. They made a good purchase. Okay.
Other than, they have to go and check the historical records of the
Yeah.
city to determine whether it was authorized.
Would the title search bring that out or they don't do that on top? No?
Search wouldn't catch this. It really, and 99% of prospective buyers are not going to ask that question.
Right.
Was this lot properly split?
I didn't.
They'll,
Candidly, the only way the city typically finds out is the person comes to the city seeking a building permit to build something on their property. At that point, the city checks its records to see whether or not it's a conforming lot. And then it realizes, hey, somewhere along the line, somebody divided this property without the city's approval. And then the permit process comes to a grinding halt. And they have to go through, prior to 2010, they would have to go through and get a plat approved by the city council. After 2010, they could at least come in for a lot split where the council approves it by resolution. You just get your legal descriptions, everything gets checked.
yeah, and speaking from personally of having to tell a persons that the lot that they have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, they cannot build on it. It's not a pleasant thing to have to do.
Have you had to do that? So just anecdotally, what do they do? They go buy some other property to fix themselves or what? Or are they just sitting at a standstill?
Well, the two that I'm aware of, the lot, he still owns them. He's not doing anything with them. They're vacant. The other one I'm aware of is waiting to see what comes of this effort on how he moves forward. So as Anthony says, it throws a wrench in the gears and just everything grinds to an immediate halt. And I guess there's legal options, but as far as I know, that neither of the property owners have taken those that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay, John, did you finish your questions?
No, I'm good. Anthony did a nice job.
Can I ask one?
Go ahead,
Sorry about
Susan.
that. So are we going to start to work with the county to have them have a checklist so to prevent this from happening in the future?
I've dealt with this issue with other cities too. Their position is, it's not our position to check. All we do, their legal position, the clerk of the court, is to accept deeds that are submitted. If they're properly executed and formed, they just record it. They're not they don't verify that all of the property's been approved by the local governments for lot splits. And that's their position, and I can't say that they're wrong.
That's one question.
Yeah, I mean, they just won't do it. It's a good question, and we wish they would at least have make sure that it's been signed off by the local government, but they do not do that. It's outside of their purview, and it's always left to the cities to deal with this after the fact when the situation occurs. Sometimes it's, you're dealing with property owners that are, to say the least, not pleased. And we're just trying to provide some limited relief for the innocent property owners.
Yeah, just a fact to know is, a title insurance, a title search, it simply verifies ownership, period, ownership. And you can sell a 1,000 size parcel or a postage stamp size or a big one, several hundred acres. All you're doing is verify ownership. And the county clerk doesn't get into how big it is or can you use it.
The law is you have the right to freely alienate or transfer, convey your property constitutionally. That doesn't necessarily mean that the city's required to recognize what you conveyed or what was conveyed to you for development purposes. There's two different issues. And as the chairman said, the title search is going to pick up what the state of the title of the property is, not whether or not the property meets the city's subdivision land requirements.
Okay, I guess let's go to keep going down the line here. Dr. Miller, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
How about you, Mr. Shroud?
Yeah, I've got questions.
Go ahead.
Is it mostly single family that we're talking about here? What is the biggest issue you see with those properties? Is it a lack of an easement? Is it a lack of access? What jumps off the plate?
I think sometimes the setbacks come into play, because if it doesn't meet the minimum width dimensions per code, then you don't have the room to take into account the setbacks that are also required.
Very good. No further questions.
Yeah, that is definitely the case with one of the situations I'm aware of. After you applied all the setbacks, the building envelope was minuscule because the lot was just, the configurations in the lot was so small. The other one I'm familiar with, that was just exactly it. It was a parcel was divided into half. It ran north-south, had frontage, let's say it had frontage up here. The lot ran north-south. It was divided in half, so that back piece didn't have direct access onto the street, the southern piece. There's ways to address that, but that was an issue.
It involved life safety at some point too. There's a structure we don't know.
Okay. Any further questions? Then I'm going to ask If there are any further comments from the staff? Okay, I think we've taken that one around and around pretty good. I think it's clear to us that we're trying to help our neighbors fix problems, and sometimes you just can't fix them. All right, I'm going to ask for a motion to recommend this to council.
Mr. Chairperson, I'm sorry, I know these virtual meetings are very confusing, and we sometimes forget there's folks listening. Can we ask Anna to, I know, to see if there's anybody online who has their hand raised that would like to speak to this issue?
Okay, I'm looking at Anna. Do I hear any indication back there?
Not at this time.
No.
Good call. Okay. Are we ready to pass a motion now? All right, let me hear a motion to recommend this to council, unless you want to amend it. Can I hear a motion, please?
Denny makes a motion to approve this ordinance as written.
Stephen Stroud seconds the motion.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Chairman Russell,
For.
Vice Chairperson Price,
For the motion.
Board Member Denny,
For the motion.
Board Member Ms. Jenicoeur,
For the motion.
and Board Member Dr. Miller.
For the motion.
All right, motion passes. That takes us next to the next item on the agenda. Let's see, now did we ask for public participation in the right order for that past item?
Yeah, yes, we're good so far, Mr. Chairman. We'll ask for public input on this after the board finishes discussion. At that point, we can ask to see if anybody would like to speak to it.
Well, we just finished our discussion and passed a motion to recommend to council, so.
Oh, yeah, so I think that ordinance we're done with that
That was
one.
done.
We're done with that.
Okay, let us move to the next item on the agenda. We're going to talk about vacation rentals and regulation thereof. And I'll ask for the staff to take us through it. David?
Yeah, thank you, Lamar. And this is a really interesting topic. I'm sure a lot of you have had conversations with your neighbors about this. It's been a topic for, I think, as long as I've been here with the city, and it seems to have spiked in the last recently. So, for that purpose, and as a result, we've had a number of residents who have come and spoke to the council, both on the street and as well as in council meetings about the issue of vacation rentals and impact on neighborhoods. And as a result, the council asked staff to take a look at reviewing our ordinance with respect to short-term rentals. And zoning board first, you may recognize on issues that were important to them as the policymakers. And so as we go through this presentation, we'll get to a point where I will we'll talk about the 5 or 6 items that the council has requested the P&Z board to help them to provide specific recommendations on. So they've already had the first reading. It's now coming here, and then once this board has made a recommendation, it'll go back to the city council, and they'll consider your input at the second reading, and then it will be final at that point. So anyways, just a little bit of a quirk in the process, but I just wanted to introduce it first before I got into it. And I won't go through this. The agenda cover word for word, but I will hit some of the highlights. And on the first page, I think it's important to note that the city of Cape Canaveral has had minimum consecutive day rental restrictions on residential properties since the 1980s. And that's significant because in 2014, the Florida legislature really started to get their fingers in city business. It's called preemption, and specifically with respect to short-term rentals. In 2014, as you can see in the second paragraph, that they began to really limit what cities can do. The cities could not prohibit vacation rentals. We could not regulate the duration or frequency of rental of vacation rentals. However, that new statute basically grandfathered pre-existing language in a city code. So since we had some existing code language in our code since the 80s, this 2014 rules didn't affect that 7-day minimum rental. That's a very good thing. So, as I said, this is becoming more and more of an issue in the city. Airbnbs the growth is just fantastic when it comes to year over year, and it's becoming a big deal in the city of Cape Canaveral. I know there's certain areas that are hit harder than others. Our single-family residential areas really seem to be impacted very, very heavily with the intrusion of these rental units. And I would like to go over the bottom of the the first page of the report. Based on practical first-hand observation, long-term experience, information learned from residents, city staff, law enforcement, and information from the U.S. Census, the City Council finds that, and these are important, these 8 bullets are important underpinnings to what we're trying to accomplish here. They're basically, you can look at them as justifications. Non-transient residents residing within residential dwellings are inherently familiar with local surroundings. So basically what that's saying is the locals, the homeowners, the folks that live here in the city are familiar with the city. In paragraph 2, in contrast, transient occupants are typically not familiar with local surroundings, local weather disturbances, local hurricane evacuation plans, means of egress from the vacation rental, thereby increasing potential risks to themselves and their families. Paragraph 3, several hundred vacation rental units are likely located within residential zoning districts of the city of Cape Canaveral. Well, that's a number that I've heard of numbers of up to 400 vacation rentals in the city of Cape Canaveral. So we don't have a real good, I can't tell you specifically how many vacation rentals we have in the city, but it's in the hundreds. And we'll get into how we're going to be monitoring that a little bit further into the presentation.
Well, David, before you go on, I was given some information by one of the local hotel owners, and he sent me a website. And you probably looked at it too, but I looked at the website and it had all the registered, or I should say known, I don't know whether they're registered or how they're known. It just said known vacation rentals in Cape Canaveral. So if you look at the city map, you see all the vacation rentals dotted over the city, and it almost covers the map. And so we can get a count from that information, but just for conversation's sake, let's assume that I'm hearing the number around 400.
Yeah, I think that's
400 is how many hotels?
3.
3 hotels at 150 units, right?
Yeah.
So we just had 3 hotels put in the city with no impact fees. So you're operating, if you're in the business, you're operating a hotel on the cheap. You're not doing all the things that hotels have to do with respect to inspections, taxes, certifications, and we're going to get into that as we go through our ordinance. But, and some of those vacation rentals are doing that. They have documentation that says they're paying taxes and they're collecting fees and they're doing the right things, but I don't know that it's happening in all cases. But all I'm saying is 150 units is a hotel. So we have something like 3 hotels imposed on the city. I would say imprinted on the city. That haven't gone through the hotel process to be regulated, meet regulations, meet fire safety, all that stuff. And they don't pay impact fees for fire safety and water. So we need to keep that in the back of our mind as we're going through this evening. And we need to keep in mind the inspections that will be required. But let's wait till we get to that. We'll explore it. But I just wanted to highlight to you that we have 3 hotels, the equivalent of 3 hotels in the town without all the things that hotels have to go through. And we're going to talk about that as we get through different parts of the ordinance. Having said that, go on, that's the main point. You got the equivalent of 3. And you think about this, if you've got, there's another theory going around that says we probably have double the number that we know about. So that would be 800 units, and that would equal 5 hotels.
Well, as we get into the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about a registration system that would be required under this new ordinance. And that will be a method that will have a much better idea of the number of units that are actually in the city.
Okay, so I held you up there on item paragraph 3 of your summary. Go ahead.
All right, paragraph 4, vacation rentals left unregulated can create negative impacts within a residential neighborhood due to excessive noise, parking and traffic problems, excessive use and impact on public services and public works, and greater occupancy than surrounding owner-occupied houses. Paragraph 5, vacation rentals situated within a residential neighborhood can disturb the quiet nature and atmosphere of the neighborhood and the quiet enjoyment of its residents. Paragraph 6, vacation rentals located within established residential neighborhoods can create negative compatibility impacts, late night activities, on-street parking issues, and traffic congestion. Paragraph 7, according to the 2010 U.S. Census, the city of Cape Canaveral has an average household size of 1.76 persons. An average household size of owner-occupied units of 1.72 persons, and an average household size of renter-occupied units of 1.8 persons. Paragraph 8, vacation rentals situated in a residential neighborhood can and do create a great disparity in occupancy, significantly above the average household size within Cape Canaveral. So
let me hold you up there. So when we get to it, we're going to talk about occupancy.
Yes.
One of the things that the council wants a good recommendation on. And I have one across the street from me. I'm going to give you some public input now. The ones across the street from me, they're good people. Guy from Orlando bought the property. Doesn't live there, just bought it for the party house, he calls it. And we have had as many as 8 cars parked across the street from my driveway. Some in the driveway, some in the yard, and some on the street. So we need to talk about that when we get there, about traffic. And numbers of people, just sheer numbers of people in the house. So you got these figures of 1.72 persons per house in an owner-occupied. And basically 3 people per house. Just
Yeah.
like 3 people per house, okay?
And I think the point is, if we've got 3 people per home in a typical single-family residential unit, anecdotally, I can tell you that the average occupancy of a vacation rental is much higher than that. And that's where the incompatibility comes. That's where the traffic issue, the parking issues, the traffic, the noise, the garbage, all of those issues that flow out of larger groups. That's where that problem comes in.
Well, I asked around the neighborhood, my neighborhood, just to talk about the subject. And my question was, how would you like to see, hear, feel a vacation rental near you? And the answer I got overwhelmingly was, we'd like to have that house look like a regular residential home. Look, sound, and feel like a regular residential home because it's in our neighborhood. And these people are guests. Nothing wrong with them coming, having a good time, staying quietly, no problem. But again, if it doesn't look and feel like a residential home where they're located, then we need to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to.
Yes. So, given all of that background, there is a draft ordinance that is attached to your packet. We'll go over that in a second, but I do want to hit some of the highlights of that. Let's just go through that. Down at the bottom of page 2 starts the description, the highlights. And as I indicated earlier, the draft ordinance proposes a registration process for all vacation rental units in the city.
Which page 2 are you talking about?
Page 2 of the agenda cover. So.
Okay. Okay, so you're down at the bottom where the paragraph begins prior to initiation.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this paragraph talks about the registration application, what the draft is going to be requiring. It's going to require a city application form. It'll require payment of a fee. Subparagraph C, it's going to require a copy of the Florida DPPR license. Most short-term rentals, vacation rentals, do require a Florida DPPR license. So it'll require a copy of that.
Is this what we call the business license?
No, that's separate. A city BTR, business tax receipt, is a separate document.
Good to know.
D, evidence of current account with Brevard County for the purpose of collecting tourist development taxes. So in this sense, they're like hotels. Like, as a hotel is required to pay certain taxes to the county for tourist-related purposes, so is a short-term rental. If we know they're there. Now, there's a lot. I'm not going to say a lot. I don't want to prejudice anybody. There may be some vacation rentals that are operating in the city that aren't properly licensed, that don't have a city business tax receipt, that don't have a copy of, that don't have a DPPR license. So one of the things that we're trying to do through this registration program is to make sure we know where the units are, and we want to make sure that they're following the right rules and regulations. And that's the purpose of these various documents that we're going to be requiring as part of the application process. Let's see, E, evidence of current certificate of registration with the Florida Department of Revenue for the purpose of collecting sales surtaxes, transient rental taxes. F, copy of the current city business tax receipt, the BTR that Lamar talked about. G, exterior site sketch indicating off-street parking. And why is that necessary? This is probably the biggest issue that we have with our short-term rentals in the city is parking. And I know you guys have seen it. We have a 3-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom townhouse, and we have 5 or 6 cars trying to jam into the driveway, and they're spilling out into the street or onto a vacant lot or across the street. They're illegally parking somewhere, it just becomes a huge issue. So what we want to do as part of this application is we want the owners to show us that they have adequate parking. Document how many parking spaces do you have, and the interior site sketch. And this is to allow us to understand the number of bedrooms in the house. And that comes into play, and that becomes important for the next paragraph, talking about maximum overnight occupancy. Now, the draft ordinance set caps occupancy in units, and you can see it's I'll call it a 2+1. A maximum overnight occupancy of a vacation rental shall be 2 occupants per bedroom plus 2 additional occupants per unit, excluding children under the age of 6. However, to a maximum occupancy of 8 if the house does not exceed 2,000 square feet, 10 if the house is between 2,001 and 3,000 square feet, 12 if the house is between 3,001 and 4,500, and 14 if it's over 4,500.
So we're going to be wrestling with occupancy and how to limit it. Another piece of information I obtained just by talking around and noodling over the problem, if you want to limit occupancy but allow everybody to have a good time, limit your occupancy to the number of bathrooms. Have them provide the number of bathrooms in the sketch, and then allow 3 to 4 people per bathroom. And that's it. Everybody gets to come, have a good time, use the bathroom, sleep in the bedrooms, park off the street, and leave. If we're going to allow 8 and 10 people and 14 people in a house, that's a crowd. And it's asking for trouble, double trouble. But that's just me talking. But I'm saying it this way right now because I want to get you thinking about it while we talk through this. How are you going to limit occupancy? If you go by bedrooms, I can take a piece of real estate in the house and I can make you a bedroom out of 10 square feet. And it's easy and cheap. All it is 2 by 4s and sheetrock and a door. But if you limit it to bathrooms, those are a little expensive to build, but you got to have them. So if you limited occupancy tied to bathrooms, number of bathrooms, you take care of parking, occupancy, and safety and health. So I just wanted to drill that into you before we get into the discussion, okay? It's a good way to limit traffic.
I'm going to add one more piece of a little bit more fodder for the board to chew on. This is one of the items that we'll talk about specifically that the council wanted the board to provide some specific feedback on, was the need for occupancy levels or maximum occupancy levels. And I'll say that because of, and it came up at the council meeting, and I want to just make sure that the board's aware of this, that currently there are occupancy levels contained in the Florida Building Code, as well as the Fire Code, National Fire Prevention Act, I believe it's called, NFPA.
Are those codes related to the numbers we're looking at here?
No, and that's why I want to say I want to talk about this just for a second. I'm going to give you an example. The Florida Building Code says that it sets a maximum occupancy level at 1 person per every 200 gross square feet in a home. So if you had a 2,000 square foot home, your maximum occupancy level today, just disregarding this ordinance, today is 10 people. So 2,000 divided by 200 is 10. So that code is in effect today. So we already have occupancy levels established. Now, and the only reason I mention that is the council raised the question: do we need to have a parallel occupancy formula in this ordinance if we already have occupancy levels set by the Florida building code. Just, and that's a question. That is not a leading, I'm not leading you to an answer. I'm just letting
Okay,
you know.
so we want to talk around that.
So one other thing is, that deal with single homes, but condominium complexes, apartment complexes. Documents associated with complexes. Also apartment. So some of that is already being addressed by other documents.
Condo docs and homeowner docs and things like that.
Well, John, I got a call from a lobbyist in Orlando yesterday. And he works for it's a lobby for the vacation homes, okay? And he's a real nice guy, well-spoken. And he indicated that we ought not to impose new licenses or new regulations on multifamily, on apartments. On apartments. Apartments can be condos, apartments can be multifamily, but on apartments is the way you put it. And that's the way their documentation is structured. So they say his position was, we're already licensed and regulated. We'd rather you didn't do it to us twice. So, okay, fine, I hear that. But I'm the guy that lives on the street and endures the noise. So we're gonna do what's right for us.
The problem is, with most of those documents, is that they're pretty much required to hardly enforced. So, I don't know what you do about that.
Well, the city can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
We don't enforce, we can't use our code enforcement powers to enforce condo docs and condo and homeowner HOA requirements. So, yeah. That's, I don't know what an HOA or a condo, I don't know if you have the ability to fine residents.
Yes, you can.
Yes, yeah.
You know what happens when that becomes attached, when the unit sells. They're like a collection of units. So they don't have to pay it. Anthony, I'm sure Anthony knows better. My understanding is, even though they may be assessed a fine, they're not responsible to pay it until the unit's sold or whatever.
Well, there are other measures they could take to make life a little uncomfortable, you
Right.
know, but it's very hard to get your hands around it and to get people to stand up and say, yes, we are renting it. And we've made it real hard to do that. But you'd be surprised how many people have friends and family.
My brother's coming into town.
And you'll be there for this weekend.
Right.
So I'm hoping if we get a database in the city, because I know where I am, they've tried to monitor it, but maybe you could share that information. You know, we have a little problem sometimes with this.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna, paragraph 3, it establishes minimum notice requirements for unit owners. They'll be required to post certain information in the units regarding parking, 911 information, maximum occupancy, things like that.
Okay, we'll talk about that when we get there.
Yep. Number 4, establishes an annual inspection requirement to verify compliance with applicable rules and regulations. So this will be creating a requirement for short-term rental units to be inspected on an annual basis to ensure that these are they're meeting minimum ordinance standards.
So let me insert another factoid.
Yeah.
400 vacation units in City of Cape Canaveral. Divided by 12 months is 33.3 inspections per day.
Well,
Per
yeah,
month. I'm sorry, per month. 33.3 inspections per month, just to get all your inspections done annually. That means one every day of the month. Where are you going to get the staff to do that? And if you don't have it now, you need to think about that in the licensing fees that we're going to talk about to pay for it.
yes.
No,
Good
sir.
questions.
The ordinance does not require an annual inspection. The ordinance states that there may be an annual inspection, and the city reserves the right to inspect for compliance purposes. The reason why it's worded that way, we had a little discussion regarding the manpower necessary to make a mandatory inspection possible. This direction to not make it mandatory, but the city reserves the right to conduct that annual inspection and to determine compliance with applicable fire and building codes.
You know, like a lot of our code enforcement actions in the city, a lot of it's complaint driven. We'll go out and do an inspection if we have a complaint from a resident. And so, I mean, you can perhaps look at it in that sense. If we're having problems with a piece of property or a unit, this language gives us the ability to get into that and to inspect it. So yes, Anthony, I should have made that clear. This ordinance doesn't say you shall. We are going to inspect every one of them every year, but it's going to be on a as needed basis. Paragraph 5 establishes duties of vacation rental orders to include registering a contact phone number, which shall be monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. B, be present at the annual vacation rental inspection. C, maintain a 3-year
Well,
log.
stop right there. It says
Okay.
Annual vacation rental inspection. Yeah, I just heard from Anthony that that's optional. Is it going to be an annual inspection or not?
It's going to be as needed. So
Yeah.
it's
It's both. The ordinance says that the city may request on an annual basis or as needed to address code compliance issues. So it's city initiated inspection, and it's an annual inspection, or on an as needed basis for compliance purposes. So that means there's not just some general annual, the ordinance does not require the city to conduct some general inspection just for the hell of it, more than once a year. However, the city can, and to determine compliance with code issues on an as-needed basis, request more frequent inspections, which basically is under the code enforcement powers which the city currently has anyway. But
So maybe what we can do to clear that up a little bit is in that subpart B there, it says be present at an annual vacation rental inspection, just drop the annual and just have it read, be present at vacation rental inspections.
We can do that in the ordinance. when we
Yeah.
get into the ordinance,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll talk about that.
okay. 5C, maintain a 3-year log of all bookings of the vacation rental, including dates of each rental and number of occupancy. Now, again, this is one of the specific items that the council asked for recommendation on, whether that would be necessary for inclusion in the final ordinance.
Well, okay, if we make it necessary, my question to you is, who's going to read the logbooks?
Whoever's upset me that day. No, I'm kidding. That is
Good answer, good answer. Where I'm driving at is,
I know.
that's a staffing issue. When we create and we're creating a lot of paper, by the way, when we get there to the ordinance. I've counted up something like 8 forms that've got to be processed to get your unit
Yeah.
registered and all that stuff.
And I think that's why the council asked for specific recommendation on this item is is this something of value? Is this going to be worth the effort, the time on both the unit owner as well as staff to be monitoring that?
Well, when we get there, we can ask ourselves, what information would be valuable reading the logbooks? And I think the answer is you never know what you're going to run across. You can generally find value in any kind of data mining, but we'll talk about it when we get there, okay?
Yes, sir. And finally, 5D, inquiry prior to check-in if any intended occupant is a sexual offender predator. And if so, the Brevard County Sheriff's Office shall be immediately notified. So basically what this is saying is the owner or the management company is going to be required to inquire of the tenants coming in if they are on the list, a sexual predator or sexual offender list.
Then if we're going to make that stick, we have to put that in a form of some kind. Otherwise, you just say, did you ask? And they say, yeah, I asked somebody, and everybody said, no, I'm not one.
Well, let me point out too, and Anthony brought this out at the council meeting. This requirement is today on the books. The county has an ordinance that requires this today.
Yeah.
So, and the question was asked, and this is another one of the items that the council wanted specific feedback on. If there is a county ordinance that requires this today, do we need to include this in the draft ordinance?
Okay.
And that's, Anthony may want to add something to that when we get to that point in the ordinance, but that was in general the discussion at the council.
Okay. We'll talk about it when we get there.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Do the hotels ask this same question?
No, in my opinion, in my experience, I've never heard the question.
I've never been asked whether I've been a sex offender at hotels, so.
That's a great question. We need to explore that a little bit. We've got a lot of exploring to do.
Yes, we do.
That we're stacking up in this ordinance. So if we get through with this tonight, that'll be good. I know that doesn't meet the schedule that you've laid out to get this done.
Yes.
But if it doesn't, it doesn't. We're going to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The next section of the agenda cover talks about a proposed timeline, which may or may not be feasible. And then the final section of the agenda cover specifies those 5 questions that the city council wanted the P&Z board to go over. And I'm going to let me just hit those real briefly, quickly, because I really want to emphasize these 5 questions. Number 1, the need for an annual inspection of the vacation rental. Is that needed? What does that accomplish? Number 2, does the ordinance need to establish maximum occupancy, overnight occupancy limits? Is that required given the fact that there are other codes that have occupancy limits? Number 3, restricts the owner from independently renting or leasing as a vacation rental an accessory structure for sleeping. I guess I skipped over that during the agenda cover.
Well, we can solve that. Just eliminate it from the ordinance. It's not allowed. I mean, that's what they're telling us. They don't want it. And the ordinance, as if I read the draft correctly, indicates that it's a non-player. So I think that problem's already solved. You can't sleep outside the shed.
Yeah, and just for the rest of the board, Lamar is on top of this, but what has happened in the past in the city is we'll have a property owner rent the home, and independently of the folks in the home, they're renting a tool shed or a camper or an RV or a tent through these different rental platforms as a separate unit. And so what the draft ordinance is saying is it's saying that can't happen. Now, if they rent the property as one, so they rent the home and that same party who's renting the home has access to this other rental area, that can be rented as one, but they cannot be rented separately. So that's what this code is prohibiting. Okay, and that's what's dealt with in paragraph 4 here. And then the last item, 5, requires an owner to inquire about whether they're on a sexual predator offender list. So those were the 5 items that the council wanted the P&Z board to, although we would like to have a recommendation on the entire ordinance, those 5 specific things they were looking to hopefully get a little bit more feedback on.
So we'll make sure we cover those tonight.
Yes, thank you. And then I won't go through our recommendation verbatim, but we're recommending approval of the ordinance with a recommendation on the need for those 5 items that are currently in the draft ordinance. Mr. Chairman, that's really the agenda cover.
So I'd like to ask for recess for 5 minutes.
All right.
Take a pit stop and give you a chance to think. Now, comrades, I'm asking all of you to think about these numbers, about these requirements, about the maximums that we've talked about. And when you make your recommendation, give me your recommendation and give me some logic behind it, if you have any. Let's do this with some real good thinking, because it means a lot to all of us. We've got to live with what we bring forward with tonight. We've got to live with it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add one more thing. I apologize. The ordinance is establishing, I really didn't cover this, I think, to the degree I want to. The ordinance is establishing a registration system, okay? It's requiring that all vacation rental units will be registered. We currently don't do that. We currently really don't have a good sense of where and how many and who owns these vacation rentals in the city. So my impression was the council as a group was very comfortable with the registration system itself. Now, however, those 5 items that I think I've pounded to death now, I think they did want some specific feedback on that, because there was still some discussion and some question in their minds about whether they were going to include those 5 items in the final ordinance. But the registration system process itself was, I think they were very comfortable with that. At least that was my sense. So,
Reading between the lines, the things they want specific recommendation about indicates that there is tension within the council. There is not agreement in the council about these items. They want us to do the homework, give them, rack up our thought process and thinking, and give them the logic package that they can take and argue about again. Okay? Let's have a 5-minute recess. Okay. Okay, David, we're ready to go into the ordinance now, yes, aren't we? All right, let me call this to order. Planning and Zoning Board will come back to order. We're back in session. We're now ready to begin going through the draft ordinance. And David, lead us through.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get into the ordinance itself, I would like to point out that the staff has been asked by the council to explore a company to assist the city with this registration program. So we have gone out and we've, in particular, Anthony has led the charge, has been talking to one in particular, a company that has a software platform that would kind of automate a lot of the functions of a registration program to include online registering, fee payments, online noticing of violations, just identifying the units. They have a system that they describe as is it crawling? I think crawling through the internet and gleaning information to help us with enforcing the city's 7-day minimum rental requirement. Currently, it's very, very difficult for a staff person to be able to, with any degree of certainty, say, those people were at that unit for 5 days. It's just very difficult to do that.
Is that what the ordinance really says, or does it say that you can't have? So let's say there's people that stay for 3 days, the place has to remain empty then for the remainder of the week before it can be rented again. Isn't that what it really says?
Yeah, I mean, that's the practical side of the city's, the minimum 7-day requirement. But yeah, I mean, and the ordinance doesn't get deep into that, but it does say we're going to create a registration system and we're going to get a software company to help us enforce it, because the whole enforcement issue right now is very difficult. Yeah. Frankly, I'm going to speak really frankly here. I don't think we've ever prosecuted a code enforcement case related to a minimum 7-day. It's very hard to document it and have the information we need to effectively prosecute it. So
also, it's hard to identify a VRBO. There has to be some kind of crawler program to identify those two.
Yes, there definitely does. And so we're looking at that. What's nice about the companies that we've talked to is, as part of the registration system, there will be an annual fee that is going to be required to be paid by the vacation rental owner. And that fee, depending on what the city council establishes that fee at, theoretically we'll be able to cover the cost of the registration system and the software, pay for all of those costs, and perhaps even a little bit of our staff costs that we still are going to have to dedicate to this issue. So we're going to be putting the cost of the monitoring this on the vacation rental units themselves, rather than coming out of general fund where all of us are paying for it. So that's an important part of this new system that we're looking at. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention that.
We are multiple companies.
Well, yes, we have, and we are. There's not a whole lot of players in this business right now. It's a fairly new industry, and these type programs usually try to fix problems, and so the problems they're beginning to surface now that Airbnb and these other platforms are becoming much more popular, and we're getting a lot more of these units, not just in the city but nationwide. So yes, we've talked to one in particular. We're in conversations with a second one right now, but there just aren't a lot of players in this business.
I have a question. David, if you have one that's registered now, and you go to the software, would you require them to re-register under the new software?
Yeah, well, I'm going to kind of dice up your question a little bit. We really don't have any per se registered in the city right now. What we do have is we have roughly 300 that have been applied for and received a city business tax receipt. So in effect, our BTR program, our system is a registration system right now. But it doesn't go anywhere near as far as what we need. It's really voluntary. If a vacation rental owner wants a BTR, they come to the city. We don't go looking for them. This new registration program and software will go out and look for owners and units, whether they have a BTR or not. They're going to go out and identify, oh no, well, you've got 500 in the city, whereas only 325 of them have a city BTR. So it's going to be much more robust and have a much greater ability to identify than we currently have.
Since we're there, and I don't want us to glance off, let's go to the specific requests that the council wants us to address.
Yeah, okay.
And let's go to page 7 of 16 in the ordinance, where it says registration.
Right.
And going down through all this, it says registration shall be based on the city's fiscal year, based on tax receipts, prior to initiating the operation of a property as a vacation rental, and prior to October 1st of each subsequent year, a vacation rental owner, either personally or through an agent, shall register with the city of Cape Canaveral using forms promulgated by the city. Okay, so they got to register. They got to bring themselves, put their little face right in front of a clerk and present a form. So,
Well, they can, and they'll also be able to register online. That's our expectation with this new system that we're looking at. They'll be, the owner's not going to have to march down to City Hall and do that.
Right. Yeah, by online or through a third-party contractor.
Yes.
And the city may extend the date, et cetera. Well, okay, that's all kinds of stuff that extends stuff.
Right.
But they got to register.
Yes, sir.
So now, if they register, we're going to collect a fee from them, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's one form. I'm adding up all the forms that they've got to submit, a rental registration form. The next thing they got to present, I'm going to page 8 of 16 on the next page. They got to present a copy of a vacation rental current and active license as a transient public lodging establishment with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Is this real? Is there such a form and everybody has one?
Yes. If by law, if you're operating a vacation rental in the state of Florida, you're supposed to have a DBPR license.
Okay, so that's, they got a completed rental registration form, that's one form. They got a copy of the vacation rental current and active license with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, that's second form. Third form, a copy of the vacation rental's current and active certificate of registration with the Florida Department of Revenue for purposes of collecting and remitting sales tax. Transient rental tax. That's the third form. 4, there's a copy of the current city business tax receipt. Next form is evidence of the vacation rental's current and active account with the Brevard County tax collector. And 6 is an external site sketch to show the off-street parking spaces. And it does say off-street parking spaces, so we're going to require off-street parking. And I think I don't know how to make it any stricter, but they need to get off the street and park on the driveway and not on the grass. And the off-street parking space should not be on the grass. And we probably ought to do something with that verbiage there. But how many we got? 6 forms. There's a 7th form. If we require an interior building sketch, we could ask them to identify the bathrooms, and if the council has the courage to limit occupancy by bathroom, then you've nailed the occupancy. Personally, I don't think they have the courage, but if they've got the courage, they can nail down the occupancy pretty doggone accurately by bathrooms. So maybe you want to put that in the ordinance, maybe you don't, but we need to talk about it.
Yeah, we'll get into that specific item here on page 10.
So, all right. So I just wanted to make sure we address that. How do you want to proceed? You want to go through this entire ordinance again, or pick out the items that they want us to bear down on?
I think we've covered the highlights of the ordinance itself. My recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is we go over the 5 items that the council specifically asked for some direction on, and I can kind of guide that direction or guide that discussion if you'd like, and we'll just do it as in order. The first one is 110-486D, which is found on page 10, and that is the maximum overnight occupancy. As you can see, the current ordinance is worded such that it's really driven by bedrooms, and then it sets an maximum occupancy by square footage as well. It cannot go over, it cannot exceed by square footage.
Yeah.
That's one approach. The chairman has brought up another approach about addressing it through number of bathrooms in the structure. Earlier, I mentioned that there's other codes that are at play as well. The Florida Building Code currently limits occupancy to 1 person for every 200 square feet. That's on the books currently.
Well, that means in a 2,000 square foot house, you got 10 people.
That's correct.
That's a big crowd.
And that's what we're here to discuss. If the board feels like that's Shinola, then we can further discuss that, and the board makes a recommendation. That's what we're here to do. So I'm going to kind of be quiet and let the board talk about this.
Dave, I have a question. I'm sure that Cape Canaveral is not the first city to deal with this. There has to be some history and some record of what other cities are doing. Is this comparable to what other cities are doing, or do we know?
Well, there's not as many as you would think. We're in the process of polling beachside communities on their processes and their programs. I think Cocoa Beach has a program. Satellite Beach has a program. And Anthony might be better able to speak to this as well. He's done a little bit of research and discussed with a couple of other Florida cities, but there just aren't that many. Like I said earlier, it's a new issue. With the growth.
There's a fair amount of cities that have tackled the regulation of vacation rentals, and some have put occupancy caps on the rental units. Cocoa Beach is an example, as Dave mentioned. I believe Satellite Beach and then Indian Harbor Beach, I think, but Cocoa Beach is 8 occupants max or something like that. I don't know. But they have maximum occupancy. Or is it 2 per? I think Cocoa Beach is 2 per bed, not to exceed 8.
So there is some history that we can compare to then, I guess.
Well, let's talk about it now. You want to talk about number of occupants per bedroom, or how do you want to do it?
Well, I first of all, let me just say, I like your idea about the bathrooms, but I have a question about that. And I don't know if in building codes, it requires X number of bathrooms per square feet of home or what. And if it doesn't, then that makes that, in my mind, to make it harder to regulate.
I just come from the viewpoint that we're talking about residential homes here turned into hotels, okay? And each residential home generally has 2 bathrooms. I don't know that for a hard fact, but
The majority do. Some of them have 1 or 1.5.
1.5,
But the majority of homes have 2 bathrooms.
so if you want to tie it to bathrooms, you can tie down occupancy pretty hard and solid. But again, I don't know that there's the courage in the council to do that. Bedrooms is probably the way we're going to wind up with it.
There may be a situation too where older homes, I grew up in a house with 1 bathroom.
Yeah.
I had 3 sisters.
So did I. Yeah.
And
That's
so,
tough.
and we had 4 bedrooms. So it's going to be all different types of situations.
I agree. Well, 8 occupants, just going down the list here. The first number 1 under that criteria was 2 occupants per bedroom, plus 2 additional per rental. So 4-bedroom is 8 people, plus 2 is 10. And that don't count the kids. Doesn't count the kids.
So if you had a 3-bedroom, you'd have 2. So 2 in each bedroom would be 6, plus 2 additional occupants. So you'd be able to have 8 people.
Yeah.
Maximum of 8, and notwithstanding the square footage. I'm not kind of looking at that. But 4-bedroom would be 10, 5-bedroom would be 12, and so on. So if you tied it to bathrooms, that would mean very seldom are you going to, majority of homes are going to have 2 bathrooms. So it's really going to, would certainly limit the number of the occupancy, depending on the number you assigned per bathroom. It's going to limit the max number in a home if you tie it to bathrooms.
Well, the secret to it is occupancy drives parking. Parking's tied to occupancy. And you need to get the cars on the property. We need to require that. We need to require all the cars to get parked on the property, not on the grass, on pavement, on pavement, on the property.
Honestly, that issue right there is going to really put a cap on the occupancy on most rental units in this city.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these single family or townhouse homes, they were built with 2 parking spaces. Maybe some of the single family homes you could put 2 in a garage and maybe 2 out in the driveway. So that's 4. But yeah, parking is an issue, and the enforcement of that is going to be key as well. You can have all these rules, but if we don't enforce it, then
Okay, well, here we are at the crux of the matter. And I'd like to ask the members of the board how they feel about this. Hopefully you had 5 minutes now to do your thinking. Do your homework. So let's start over here on the left and ask if you, Steve, if you have any logic about occupancy, parking, bedrooms, however you want to put it.
These numbers are just so high for this amount of square footage. I'm staring at these numbers. I divide them by 2. It almost seems to me that's the correct number don't ask me, there's not any logic to that, but 2,000 square feet for occupants, I think that's a good number. In fact, if you bring in two different adults, two different adult families, it's two vehicles. 2,000 to 3,000 square foot, split that number in half, 5 occupants. And then on, just divide the rest of them by 2.
I don't think you can do odd numbers, Steve.
This is true.
So go back through that again now, how you want to dissect this set of numbers here, Steve?
Items 1 and 2, divide those by 2, and you get 4 occupants and 5 occupants. As John pointed out, that's kind of not reasonable, but maybe 6 would be better. And 12, 6 occupants there too. For the 4,500 square foot, 8 occupants, keep even numbers.
So if I can just interrupt for a second, I think one of the things that seems to be of primary concern is parking. And that makes sense to me because that's exterior. People around you see that, they don't see, it's not inside the dwelling. And again, if you're talking about VRBOs and that type of thing, a lot of those, I think, are in existing apartment complex or condo complexes and that type of thing. And there are documents, there are parking restrictions already built into those. So for example, where I live, it says a maximum of 2 vehicles, period. So that would automatically limit, I would think, the maximum number of occupants. Even if they were 2 minivans that were stacked full, you're still looking at, not a bunch of people. But to me, it's hard to regulate what you can do inside the dwelling. It's much easier to regulate what takes place outside the dwelling. That has a more direct impact on the surrounding neighborhood. So maybe that's the way to look at it, is, what are we going to do in terms of parking? And I really haven't thought that through, but that's just what comes to me.
I agree too. I think the parking is the biggest issue. And if you've already got other ordinances for how many people can occupy buildings with fire codes and whatever, we don't need to come up with new numbers, right?
Well,
I never heard where these really came from.
but that being said, I'm saying condominium complexes and that type of thing, but single home residences in neighborhoods like Lamar lives in, that's a whole different story.
Well, that's true.
There aren't, I assume that there's not that kind of regulation or bylaws for your development. And if there aren't, then there probably should be, based on, I just look at it and say, I don't want people telling me what I can do inside my house. Yeah, I'll play the game and I'll obey the rules outside, but don't tell me that I can't wear plaid shorts inside my house, or whatever.
Yeah, I think regulating the parking is a good direction to go. I have in my neighborhood, on the block I live on, there are 4 vacation rentals. And so far, they haven't really gotten out of bounds. One is going to be private. It already has been, looks like it's heading that direction.
Well, and I think we've all seen it. There's always, you can establish any rules that you want to. There's going to be a high school graduation party where a group of kids rent a a house or a condo on the beach or something like that, and there's going to be 40 kids there, and you'll call the police a half a dozen times, and tomorrow morning the kids will go away. It's a nuisance. I mean, it's a nuisance. But the best laid plans aren't going to stop that kind of thing. It's just going to happen, I think.
Any other thoughts? Dr. Miller, you got any wisdom to share with us?
Well, I also live with one of these across the street from you. And it's not always been a pleasant situation. I agree that it's very difficult to limit the number of occupants inside, but when you get up to over 8 people inside a house on our street, that's way too many people. They spill out into the backyard, they spill out into the driveway. And
Then there's noise ordinances for that, right?
and we have called multiple times. I have a problem with excluding the children under 6 years old, because that sometimes is one of the major problems with them in the pool till 1 o'clock in the morning, screaming to the top of their lungs. I like the idea of no more cars than will fit into the driveway. I think that will help. But I would like for us to look at the children. And as a educator, I'm here to uphold children at all times, but not at 1 o'clock in the morning in the pool. That becomes a problem, especially when you have 3 or 4 couples that are renting these together and each one of them have 2 or 3 kids. It does make a difference. And all the things we're talking about are going to be very difficult to control. But we have to have some kind of regulations here on this, or they just do as they please. That's my 2 cents.
Very good. We were talking earlier. Seems like every little kid in the world jumps in the pool and first thing they want to do is scream. So you get a lot of that. And I happen to be one of those fortunate residences has a vacation rental across the street and the swimming pool's in the front yard. So I get to hear all the enjoyment that the little guys do, and as well as the young guys. I think if you can regulate the number of people in the place, you give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance for peace and quiet. If you can keep the number of occupants in a normal residential home, which is about 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, stuff like that all around the neighborhood. 8 occupants is a good number. I think 8 grown-ups and not putting a number on the children. That's a variable that's really tough. But anything over 8 people, you got a bunch of loud talking, and you add alcohol to that. You got louder talking, and you can even have trouble with it. So 8 people in a vacation rental sounds to me about like the right number. 8 people and kids. They get to come to the house, and like John said, you're going to get the noise. They're on vacation. They don't have a curfew. They don't have bedtime limits. Those kids get to stay up all night if they want to. If the grown-ups can stay up with them. So they're there for a good time, and the noise goes with it. But this is coming in on top of us. It's inundating our neighborhoods. It's affecting the peace and quiet in the neighborhoods. We've got to control the noise and the traffic.
I agree with that. And if they were staying in hotels, there are rules
Yeah.
And times that they can use the pool and whatnot.
Well, in a hotel, they close the pool at 9 o'clock or whatever, and you can't get in. They close the restaurants at 10 o'clock. So they limit your access to things.
So it's easy to see why these vacation rental freestanding homes are the ideal situations. They have total and complete freedom of movement, you know, all night long. It's a great situation for vacation, but not for those of us who have to live here and endure it. So,
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question of the board? Is there any value to looking at single-family homes differently than we look at condos or duplexes or townhouses? I guess my question is, is there any value to treat them differently with respect to regulating?
You know, as I'm sitting here listening, I looked at this from a totally different perspective because I'm in a homeowners association and we're gated and we have all these rules and people can't put 5 cars anywhere. There's no room to put 5 cars in. Our pools are closed at dusk. It's so much more regulated, and I wasn't thinking about independent homes. And the problem is very different in a way. You know, to me, it's like, well, isn't there a law against putting your cars on your grass? Isn't that some kind of code violation?
It is.
Cars are supposed to be parked on hard.
It is, but it's the
No
enforcement of it is, I'm not going to say problematic, but it's just a matter of staff. A lot of this stuff happens at nighttime or on the weekends when our code enforcement staff is not around. Now, we do have a code enforcement individual that works in the evening and on a 1 day a week or 1 day a weekend.
The problem I see, though, I don't know how practical it would be to separate those two out. I don't know how you can do that.
I think single-family homes used as rentals, vacation rentals, could take a lesson from townhomes and condominiums and the rules and bylaws that they have in place already. I mean, the problem always is enforcement.
Yes.
You know, and I mean, you can have all the rules in the world, but until you can enforce them, that's an issue. But
Well, before you enforce, you've got to have criteria.
Right.
So,
like in the complex, we have restrictions on use of pool, what time the pool closes. We have restrictions on, you know, parties outside of the dwelling after certain hours, you know, that kind of stuff. And when those are violated, we can call the sheriff's department and they come and clean it up. And so, yes, I agree. We need to have those regulations. We need to have rules and regulations in place so that they can be dealt with. But it's still hard. Still hard to do.
do you think? No, I had a thought. And after I thought about it again, it wasn't a good thought. The thought was, is there any way to regulate the pools? Can we get these houses with pools with people in them to close the pool at 10 o'clock at night? I doubt it.
No, they'll just go outside and have a barbecue at 2 o'clock.
Well, so to me, there's a difference of enjoying your pool and being obnoxiously loud. So we have, I'm sure that there's in place noise violations, and you can call the sheriff on that and have that dealt with. If somebody wants to go out in their backyard and sit in their pool or hot tub and drink a glass of wine and listen to nice music, more power to them. You know, as far as I'm concerned.
That's good behavior. Civil behavior.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that was discussed at the council meetings. We do have ordinances on the books that deal with specifically parking.
Yep.
And noise.
Yep. Don't you think though, when you're putting in a formal registration process, the owner of the dwelling is going to be put in a position that they have to provide information on who's there, be licensed, kind of step up and be more responsible as these folks that live in another state and they just collect a check and rent it out? That maybe the registration process is going to make this a more formal procedure and have more responsibility to maintain some kind of order.
Yeah, yes, in the registration program that we're looking at will do that. They'll be required to provide a 24/7 contact person and phone number. And there's also, one of the systems that we're looking at provides, I'll call it a resident hotline that allows a resident who has an issue with a particular unit to call and to address that with the software company, and then they contact the owner. So there's going to be a little bit more direct feedback to the owner, letting them know the issues going on.
And have some sense of responsibility. So many of these folks are operating under the radar. And they haven't been forced into a situation where they have to acknowledge ownership and responsibility. So if they have to provide all these other documents and there's a way to get them to do that, and I know it's easier said than done, that they might look at their clientele a little differently.
Can I play devil's advocate on that one? I think what you do up front in the registration process is probably exactly what you're saying. What I'm afraid of is that once you're registered and it's been a while since you registered and that money starts coming in, I think you kind of forget all the things you agreed to during your registration process.
Yeah, and also a lot of the owners have management companies handling their properties for them, and so you work in some cases you may not be working directly with the owner. It's going to be a management company, so there's a buffer there. But there is the stick that we're ultimately going to have as a city is going to be the registration process is going to provide the documentation, which, as I indicated earlier, we don't have now. It's difficult to gather. It's going to provide us with the documentation that we need to deal with these bad actors through our code enforcement process. Right now, that tool is very limited. But when we have this documentation, we can prepare a case, we can prosecute a case, and we can effectively deal with folks who are habitual offenders of city code, and so that will help too.
Which leads me to another question. If you have one of those bad apples and they had X number of city violations, are they in jeopardy of losing that license?
Yeah, that might be an Anthony question, but as I recall, the ordinance does give the city the ability not to renew that license. Is that correct, Anthony? Am I imagining something?
It's just a registration scheme. It's not a licensing scheme. No, there's no revocation or suspension provision that's built into the ordinance. The object of the ordinance is to get vacation rentals registered, so the city has the ability to monitor them. Compliance with codes. It's not a licensing scheme. As you know, the state of Florida licenses vacation rentals. There is a licensing scheme in the state. So if they violated state requirements, there's a possibility they could lose their state license to engage in some public lodging establishment.
So I think the answer is it's going to fall back on code enforcement. we have a bad actor out there that habitually abuses X, Y, or Z, we will take them through within our new ability to collect documentation. We'll take them through our code enforcement, and we'll financially disincentivize them, if that's a word.
Well, as we were talking, I was thinking I had another wild idea. Let me try it out on you. So at registration, we collect a noise fee, a nuisance fee, $200. And if the sheriff's department gets a call or the code enforcement gets a call about your property, city gets to keep your money.
Like an escrow deposit.
If you said to me, we're gonna charge you a $200 nuisance fee, so if you're too loud, you're just giving me permission to be loud, I just threw away $200.
Well, I knew it was crazy when I thought about it, but.
Yeah.
Yep. If there's a way that you can incentivize the owner and the vacationers to behave, that's what we're reaching for.
Dave, is there the ability to require when they register, also registering the license plate numbers of the vehicles that they're going to be? I know we don't have that power at the condominium level. We can't do that. It would be nice. I think if that could be done, that would certainly restrict.
Are you suggesting that we get the license plate numbers of the
Renters.
Oh, well, I mean, when they register, they would know who the renters were going to be for the rest of the year. So I think that would be difficult to get.
I thought we're talking about vacation renters.
So what are we gonna do with that plate number?
Well, then you can monitor, okay? We've got 6 cars parked there and only one of them has the license plate that was registered for that rental.
Oh, are you talking about the owner's plates? I mean, how would you know who the renters are going, what their plate numbers would be when you register once a year?
That's what I'm saying. When somebody rents a vacation rental,
Okay.
all the information they have to
I
give,
see.
part of that
At
would
the
be,
time of rental,
Right,
that's required.
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know. about-
What does
I
that
don't know.
do for you though? Hey, I mean, if you have people riding around, you see a bunch of cars, then you're gonna have somebody trying to look in some database to see who's a renter, who's not, or if it's just somebody.
yeah,
You're talking almost like a parking pass. Okay,
Right.
we're gonna give you 4 parking passes
Right.
based on your number of
And that's
parking
probably better-
spaces you
that's probably
have.
better. That's probably a better way to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you don't have a parking pass in your windshield,
Yeah.
you've got problems.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to do it. Thank you. That's,
Okay.
Well, the logbook, the vacation logbook, if we require the owners or whoever, or the realtor or whoever administrates the rental, requires them to keep names, numbers in their logbook, then we would have that information in the logbook, trying to chase down plate numbers.
Well, Lamar, my first question with that is, who's to say that I rent to 4 people, or say 6 people, or say 20 people, and I only put 2 in the logbook? How do we know that logbook matches up with who actually is staying in that?
You're exactly right. And
My thought is that these people are in this to make money. And the majority of these people are good people and they're doing what they need to be doing. It's only a handful that we need to worry about. But the only way that you're going to get their attention is with taking money away from them. So, I mean, we can regulate all we want, but if we don't put some kind of fine onto it, you're not going to get those people's attention. Because when you take money out of their pocket, then they listen.
I agree with that.
well, how's this sound to you then? If a property gets loud and the code enforcement or the sheriff's department is called to go and calm it down, How about automatic fine? Doesn't matter what happened, if the cops got called and they had to roll a car to the place and a officer has to take action, make that an automatic fine, lien the property for that fine.
Well, I mean, the city does have citation powers. I mean, it's essentially a ticket, but I'm not sure if that's,
There's a distinction between call for service, which is under the general police powers and under the general budget of the city, and a violation of the code. So, property owners pay ad valorem taxes to be afforded general services. Police is one of them, fire, right, there's another. If there's a violation, on the other hand, the city can impose a penalty. So I don't think I would go down the route of imposing a fine for a specific call for service. Undoubtedly, calls for service may not be generated by the property owner. They're gonna be generated by sometimes overly sensitive neighbors that just want to call. So you're really going to be incentivizing the neighbors to call as a punitive measure because they don't like a vacation rental in their neighborhood, would be my guess. So, when this ordinance was drafted, one of the things we consciously did was we said the city has a variety of rules already on the books, and those rules can be enforced to any property owner that gets out of hand. Behavioral problems, whether it's too many cars parked in the yard, whether it's a nuisance, right? Loud noise, music. We stayed away from putting that type of stuff in this ordinance because we have ordinances of general application. But there are penalties that are being imposed for specific violations of this ordinance. It's recommended and it's in the body of the ordinance.
So, one of the things that comes to my mind is the best way for any kind of regulations to have the impact is to include the owner directly, not just the renters, but the owner. So when there's an infraction, get the owner directly involved. So every time this happens, the owner is inconvenienced. They either want to be a good neighbor or they don't. If they don't want to be a good neighbor, then, eventually, I suppose the law again, but if they want to be a good neighbor, then they'll figure out a way to rent to people that aren't going to cause those kinds of problems.
well, and to Dr. Miller's point too, is that when we do issue a notice of violation and do issue code enforcement fines, they will be directed at the property owner. It's not going to be the renters. It's not going to be the property management company. It's going to be the owner who will be responsible for that. So yes, I agree.
By the way, Anthony, this is a good draft. This is a well-drafted ordinance.
Very good.
I spent, when did we get this thing off? When she put it up online?
A week ago.
I spent the entire week. I read this thing every day, read through it every day. I practically have it memorized. And I haven't been able to improve on it a lot, except those occupancy figures. They get under my skin. There are too many people. We've got to fix that if we don't fix anything else.
So that is a point that the board can agree on as a board, that the occupancy levels are, as currently drafted, the board feels are too high, there's too many.
Yes, I agree.
I'm seeing everybody
Yeah.
shaking their head.
So that's a yes. Yeah.
I think at least, and I think it's been mentioned already, the kids need to be figured into those numbers.
Okay, yeah, I have a note of that. I think
Yeah.
Dr. Miller made.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of Lamar's of looking at the bathrooms. I think that's an important thing, and I like the idea of looking at the number of parking spaces both. I think both of those need to be added in there. To me, that makes more sense than 2 people to a bedroom.
Tying the occupancy to either bathrooms or parking,
Or
available parking
both.
spaces.
Or both. I think both.
But when they register, right, you're gonna know, you're gonna have a sketch of the inside, the outside, and then we're gonna know you only have room for 2 cars and a bicycle,
Yes,
right, or whatever. And
yes,
if they register, then we say, okay, your vacation rental based on your number of bathrooms and bedrooms and how much parking, this is your occupancy that you got. But it's kind of a formula.
yes.
I like that. And I think all cars need to be on property and not on the street.
Agreed, yeah.
Parked on a hard surface.
Yeah, on a hard surface, yes.
And that doesn't mean paving over the front yard.
Mr. Chairman, I know we still have a little bit of time left this evening. It's certainly at your discretion on how late you would like to go. Obviously, we're just kind of finishing up one of the 5 items. I'm not sure if we're going to get through everything this evening. My recommendation for the board's consideration would be that you make the board would forward a recommendation to the city council to postpone their February council meeting second reading of this ordinance until this board has an opportunity to perhaps meet again to have further conversations on this issue. And you're able to formulate recommendations on all 5 of the items and forward those to the council. My recommendation.
I like that idea. I think we've had a very good discussion on this, but I don't think we're finished.
We're like a jury. We're making progress, but we're not there yet.
That's not fair.
I was on a jury with an arson case, so been there, done that. Okay, so we've got one good recommendation out of our staff member. That, how do you want to word that? Let's go ahead and get something on paper so that we can nail this one down and move on to the other items that the council really wants us to. I think once we get this one squared away, the other ones will go pretty quickly, but I don't want to do them late at night when I'm half groggy.
Well, I'm going to semi-defer to Anthony on the wording of a recommendation regarding this. I mean, I've heard in the concept, the kind of the 50,000-foot concept of where the board wants to go. Formulating specific wording for a recommendation is going to be, I don't know, Anthony, what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing we need is a delay.
Yeah.
And then the second thing we need is that guideline about off-street parking, get everything off the streets. And what do we say, 8 to 10 max people, 8 people max plus kids?
Is that the board's, I'm not sure I heard that specifically, but is there a cap that
Give me
the
a
board
number,
is?
guys. What did you toss at us a while ago?
Kids should be included in the number.
Yes, yeah, the children currently it's children under 6 are excluded. But I think the board is saying they're not comfortable with that. They should be included in the count.
Include all persons in the count. Okay, what's the count?
That's my question.
That's the crux of the matter, and we need to recommend Anthony a number to carry to the council that, you know, they will change it.
We're not going to present this to the council yet, right?
No,
If you're gonna recommend postponement, then, send that recommendation to the council. And then we can come back to you maybe with some more information before you formulate a recommendation on maximum occupancy. There's a couple of outstanding issues I think we want to talk to David about, on that issue, because keep in mind, just from my own practical experience with other cities, number of parking spaces on the site are not going to limit the maximum occupancy. When somebody tries to get around that, they get around that by coming in, renting vans, they drop them off, they find alternative parking opportunities to get around that. Cape Canaveral certainly has ample overnight parking facilities where, you can end up with, 10 carloads of people, but not, 8 of the cars are spending the night over one of our overnight parking facilities, which we have plenty. Then 2 cars are on site, yet you have, you have 4 times 10, 40 people staying in the house. So my point is the number of parking spaces, while it may be a factor, is not going to protect an overcrowding situation in all cases.
Well, how do we,
I'll agree we need occupancy
Yeah.
and work, and even if they do that, as long as it's not above the 10 people or 8 people. Depending on.
I heard the board say that, perhaps number of bathrooms and parking should be factored into determining the maximum occupancy. But there's some other issues, I think, out there, and they just noted the overnight parking that we have, plethora of Cape Canaveral.
Yeah.
The torpedo.
okay, well, we hear that, that's why it's council. Then we're not there yet. We
Right.
need to keep working with it.
That's what the board, my initial point was, if the board wants to postpone a recommendation, we heard your comments, we can come back and give you some more guidance, and then you can actually give a precise recommendation at the next meeting regarding maximum occupancy.
And I think this is of the 5, this is the big nut.
I agree. That's why I wanted to attack it first. I figured we probably, in mulling this over for the past week, I figured we probably wouldn't get there tonight. But I figured we could do a lot, or at least leave everybody with plenty to go away and think about. The 3-year log, I'm not really crazy about that because I don't know how much good it's going to do us, but we need to talk some more about it. Need to hear some more. We need to hear some more words. The sex offender, I don't think that's going to do much for us, but that's just my personal feeling. So, accessory structures, that made it into their top 5 list.
Yes.
That's easy. Just ban it. Can't sleep in the garage or the workshop. But okay, well, I think we can talk through that one pretty rapidly. So the only thing we got really left was the annual inspection. Was that one of the top 5?
Yes, that's number
Yes.
1.
In the annual inspection, we need to, I don't even remember the criteria for that one. But anyway, I'm trying to see where we're at here at 10,000 feet. So we've had a good conversation about occupancy. We don't like the numbers on paper. They need to be less. I think Anthony gets it. So parking off the street, we can fix that by requiring all of our cars associated be parked off the street, recognizing that there can be other cars elsewhere in the crowd in the house. We've got to find a way to limit the crowd and the noise. Don't know whether they can or not.
Well, there's ways to backdoor that. It's limit the people. But we can discuss that further.
How do you do that? How do you limit the number? How do you keep them from bringing a van load and letting it out and leave? What's the mechanism here?
Maximum occupancy.
You set a maximum occupancy cap, number of persons
Okay.
that can have overnight stays, and that's what the ordinance proposes. That was my point, that just limiting the number of cars that can park on site may not help you in all cases on limiting the occupancy. And the fundamental problem is in the recitals is that you look at the average household occupancy in Cape Canaveral versus a transient rental. We have two families coming in and occupying one dwelling unit. Is that their transient occupancy is higher than the permanent occupancy of owner-occupied residents or long-term residents, leased residents, and lose the neighborhood respect, people coming and going. And the only way to really tackle that problem, love to see other ideas, is the hard maximum occupancy cap number of persons.
How do you enforce that?
That's not going to limit your eventual public nuisance. It could be one person staying there and they could be the biggest nuisance in the neighborhood, right? And it could be a permanent resident. Those types of violations are on a case-by-case basis. But the only way to kind of perhaps mitigate against those nuisances and overcrowding is setting hard occupancy caps. That's what those are. I'll leave that up to the board to recommend and how to do it. But the ordinances that I've read in other communities, they tend to have those max occupancy caps. Now, one thing that David did mention, just a little caveat, and I know we've spent a lot of time on this already, is that the Florida legislature there's a bill filed in the legislature that could curtail home rule authority even further and undo a lot of what's in this ordinance.
The question that I have, Anthony, is if you set a maximum occupancy, how do you enforce it?
Yeah, exactly.
To me, it doesn't make any sense to have codes or regulations that can't be enforced.
It's like any other code, you have to, how do you enforce it, right?
Right, exactly.
It's there. In most cases, the vacation rental is not a problem. It's always those extreme situations, right? So you put codes in place to really address those extreme bad actors. And when you have those extreme bad actors, you're hoping that the evidence is more profound and you can actually cite them for a violation rather than go and doing head counts on every vacation rental every day in the city of Cape Canaveral.
Yeah, we're just putting in place tools that if we have to use, we can on those bad actors. Will there be vacation rentals that exceed the maximum occupancy level and are not an issue? We won't get involved in. Of course, there's going to be that. It's those bad actors that we need to have tools in the book to deal with. That's where.
Right now, the Florida Building Code does have maximum occupancy for dwelling units, 200.
Yeah, 200.
One per 200 square feet. So that's the law today. Enforcing that on a day-to-day basis is really not really practical.
One per 200 is, let's see,
2,000 square foot home is 10 occupancy.
10 feet.
Similar to this, but one thing that wasn't touched upon, the occupancy is related to overnight occupancy. So it's overnight occupancy, right? You could have an overnight occupancy cap of 8, but during the day they might have some guests. Brings the occupancy up to 15. As long as they're not all of them are not overnight, then that would be acceptable under the ordinance and traffic.
Can you take that thought and run with it?
There's a lot the comments that we received, there's a lot to chew on, and I got to go back and look at some of the more specific code provisions, just to collect our thoughts and come back to you.
That's fair. All right, that's what we think about occupancy. We got to do more thinking, and that's okay. That's what we're hired to do. If you feel like you're underpaid, have another cup of coffee. And which other of the top 5 would you like to talk about before we leave tonight? Let's spend another half an hour here till 9 o'clock and we'll leave. What's next, Anthony? Dave?
I mean, I think I've heard the chairperson speak about all 5 of them. If we can just quickly go through them regarding the owner's requirement to inquire prior to check-in if a intended occupant is a sexual predator or offender. I heard the chairman indicate that he wasn't sure if that was going to be feasible and what that would accomplish.
But you already said that was covered, right?
And there already is a county ordinance in place that requires the same thing. So does the board feel like this is duplicative and this does not need to be in the ordinance?
Does it need to be?
Does not need to be. Is that?
Can I just have a little bit of discussion? I know I brought up that the hotels don't ask about the sex offenders too, but when somebody rents a trailer park in the area or something like that, they register their address because I know my credit check. I get, oh man, there's a lot of sex offenders in trailer parks over here. If we're going to have these people in our neighborhoods where we live, we may want to know that, just so the cops may want to know that, there's somebody who has had not so nice of activity in the past around your children. It's just another thought to put out.
Along that line, a neighbor of mine who's she's good at prowling through I won't say prowl, she's good at mining the data, the county data about sex offenders, tax rates, property sales, all that stuff. And she says that we have a large number of sex offenders registered in Cape Canaveral. So we know who they are because they're supposed to register after they're convicted.
Yeah, the requirements already in place for that to happen.
You just brought up a point though. We're talking about people that live here and registered, as opposed to someone renting in our neighborhoods that we don't know and are not registered in. I didn't think of it part of it.
That's a good point, but how would you investigate them? So they walk up, they want to rent the house, and you say, "Are you a sex offender?" "Oh, I'm not." And you could say, "Well, you investigated that?"
Yeah. Who's going to volunteer that information?
You already know the answer you're going to get. So how do you investigate it? I don't know.
It's not a very practical requirement as far as black and white what you're getting. It's not. It's.
I wonder how many owners would then make a call to the city and say,
Right.
"Hey, I just rented my place to a sex offender."
Right. Or a property management company, which frankly, the majority of our units in the city are handled by. Are they going to do that? Go to that effort? It's a question.
I'm going with that. It's probably not the most practical, but I just wanted to look at it in all directions
Yes.
to have the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So we can say on that point, we didn't reach it. We have no recommendation. We already have laws on the books. Is that what I'm hearing? I know it's reluctant. We don't want to turn loose of it, but I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, I wouldn't pose that on the owner to ask that question either, because as we all just discussed, who's going to tell the truth, right? When you're trying to rent something. And, yeah.
I agree. I agree. You already know the answer you're going to get. Chuck, Todd, I'm sorry. You're Chuck Todd on Face of the Nation. Go ahead, Todd.
City Manager, just a point of clarification. I'd like to clarify to Anthony. The requirement in Brevard County statutes for the registration of a sex offender, the burden is on the offender, the guilty party, the person who is actually found guilty. That's the person who has the burden to report. Is that correct? Currently.
They have the obligation to register with the sheriff, whether it's a temporary or permanent residence.
What we do with this ordinance will not affect the burden of that person to do that. What this ordinance would do would be place an additional burden on the owner to affect that same question. So what's before this board tonight is you want to keep that in there or strike that from the ordinance. If a sex offender is going to lie to an owner of a vacation rental, that's the best information the vacation rental owner has to offer. I'm not sure that having that step in the ordinance makes that person come clean any better. That's what I'm saying. So there's an argument for striking if it's superfluous.
Yeah, I think that we are saying to strike it.
That's what we're hearing, but I'm hearing a murmur over here.
Are we going to make recommendations to the city council tonight? Are we going to postpone?
I would like to
Read
ask
again.
for a postponement. Let's keep talking for a few
Okay,
minutes. but
all
I
right,
would
all
like to
right.
ask for a
I'm just
postponement.
confused about.
Yeah, ask for a postponement so
Okay.
that we can solidify our thinking and our
I thought
recommendation.
we're postponing all 5 of these recommendations or just the occupancy.
I would recommend it. We might as well just let them all 5 fall.
Yeah.
All 5, okay.
Postpone all five.
Okay.
And we'll tie it all up into a package when we're done.
Okay.
Or at least that's what I heard from Anthony. You okay with that, Anthony?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to make a recommendation on the entire ordinance. So it doesn't make any sense to just do a partial recommendation at this time.
Right.
Council will be able to act on it.
So we've wrestled with occupancy. We've wrestled with sex offender issues. Still like the idea of somehow making the owner renter somehow tied in with, but I don't know how. So I'll leave it at that. We're not there yet on that one. We're not there. The 3-year log book.
Yes.
What was their reasoning for that?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Well, I was just asking John, what were we going to do with the data? If we know who's renting and how many are there from day to day and everybody's there, what is that? Is that a statistical collection of data or what?
But I could be doing a log here tonight and I could count half of us and put it in my log. Or I could count us twice and put it in my log. And that doesn't mean it's true.
You might not log every occupant.
And my expectation of this registration software that we're looking at there will be reporting capabilities of it as well. So I think we may be able to get statistical data from the report that we may or may not get from
Well,
this
now,
log as well.
what will this company do? They poll the vacation rental owners to get data on occupancy. I mean, how will they gain their data information?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I don't believe the software is going to provide a occupant count. No, that won't happen.
So they're not going to have to go in and put each occupant's name of the week that they're renting it.
I mean, sure.
Todd?
My understanding, after being involved in some of these discussions with most clients, is what they do with their data, scraping, whatever they call it, they create a compliance profile for each vacation rental through a series of screenshots. And it's daily, it's every day. But through these screenshots that are stored in the home staff, you can see things like customer reviews. What do they say? Reviews are very important. They might just say, you had 14 people say. Okay, well, there's evidence right there. It might be something else that they put in a review. Maybe that the owner put it in their review about this person. They lost you guys. We get a full profile of what happens based on what is input onto that site. That's what we're buying from this company. That makes it a composite profile of this particular property.
Who will make the input? Who will input the data?
The owners and the users, the vendors. So that's in a nutshell how it works. You don't know what's going to come into it. You're going to have all of that at fingertips, whatever it is. It's a screenshot that to include calendar dates and rental dates, and that's going to help us set up the data. We stayed for 2 days and figured out what we love it. Well, the next person 3 days later, so we stayed for a day. Wait a minute. At 1 and 1, there's a violation. That's kind of the way this software works. You don't know what we get. You cast your fact, you pull out the lake, you don't know what kind of fish is going to be found.
Question, Todd, I know that the renters will have a chance to rate the Airbnb. Did I hear you say that the owner would have a chance to rate the renters?
Yeah, it works both ways. Most of the platforms do this through the customer. You don't have to, but there's a mechanism for it.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Thanks, Todd. Okay, so we've covered occupancy, we've covered vendors, we've covered the 3-year log.
As far as the 3-year log, though, am I getting a consensus that it's not needed? Or it is needed? I'm not sure.
I think it's a waste.
Okay.
I
Stephen, you think
I
so?
think
You
what
don't think it's
Tom,
needed?
I don't see that.
All right. Is that?
I don't either. And just as a general statement, I'm seeing a whole lot of data gathering and a whole lot of analysis. And, you know, if we're not going to be able to enforce everything, I mean, is there a business case that says an estimate of how much it's going to cost for all of this data gathering? And then, you know, a reasonable, you said, you know, charge them, you haven't come up with a fee yet, $175 or whatever. You think that by them registering is going to pay for all this manpower getting you this data, but what's the return on investment other than trying to make sure our neighborhoods are safe and we, you know, want to still live in Cape Canaveral instead of having everything going crazy? I'm still not focused in on whether or not.
Yeah, well, we haven't fully gone down that path yet. One of the things that we'll be doing, had scheduled to do at the February meeting, was present the city council with a resolution to establish a fee for the registration. And based on that, we were going to have we have a pretty good idea of the cost. It's going to be roughly $45,000, right, for the software, annual cost for the software. Let's say if we have 400 units in the city now, if we were to charge them $200 a month, that would be $80,000 annually that we would collect off of that. So it's not a money losing proposition.
200 a month or 200 a year?
A year, 200 annually.
Well, factor into that all the paperwork costs. We've levied 6 or 8 forms, and I think they're all valuable. They should be collected.
A lot of this, the lion's share of the work is going to be handled by the software company for that $45,000. There will still be costs, city staff costs, attorney costs. So we'll factor all of that in when we make a recommendation to the city council when we're establishing that registration fee. So I can guarantee you we're not going to lose money on it. But
I talked to Bob Barker, the
Yeah.
hotelier, and Tom Hermanson, the other hotelier. And the most valuable advice I got from them is cover your cost. So, and each of them said, we can't tell you how to run this because it's such a small subset of a hotel operation that we can't even prorate out of our mountains of data what you ought to charge for licenses and so forth. But whatever it is, you ought to cover the cost with the registration. So you should be generous on how much it's going to cost to sift through. Somebody's got to look at every form you collect. You're going to do it here in house, or you're going to pay that web person to do it.
Right. Yeah. Like as I said earlier, we don't want the general taxpayers of the city to pay for a program to monitor short-term rentals. We want it to be an adequate user fee that the users are going to be paying for that. So that's how it would be set up.
And honestly, $200 a year is nothing to how much money these people are making.
I agree.
Probably one night rental.
There are oceans of money coming at these people from everywhere in the world. So don't be bashful about asking for a little bit of it.
Yeah, we've talked to the service provider, and they've given us it can range anywhere from a 1 to 3 night rental fee. So if it's $200 a night, it can range anywhere from $200 to $600 for that annual fee. That's their experience with their customers, their governmental customers, 1 to 3 nights.
Say how much? Say the dollars again.
1 to 3 nights, and say if the average rental is say for discussion purposes $150 a night. So 1 to 3 nights, the annual registration would be anywhere from $150 to $450, and that will be that'll obviously be determined by the council.
And that's going to be per week.
Per month, or excuse me, per year.
Annual. Yeah.
Per year.
Annual.
So say $450 times 400 units, that's $180,000 a year.
How much money does the average vacation rental make per year?
How much do they make? I don't know.
How much do
profit?
they bring in? Do you have any idea about that? Well, you can calculate it, $150 a night times the rental
I
of
don't know
say
what they're occupied.
4 nights a week.
Well, if it's 150
I'll do
times
it
4, that's
myself.
$600 a week. So that's 30 grand a year, roughly 35 grand a year.
So why would you have a problem asking them for $300 to $400 a year?
Well, if that's, although it's not, if you'd like to make a recommendation on that to the council, we can have that conversation.
They didn't ask us for that, but I'd like to have it in.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, I'm going to sit down with a pencil and paper and see what I think. I encourage everybody else to do
I
that.
like the idea of the more money that you bring in, more rentals, the higher your fee. I like that.
To them, it's very easy money, and it's free money, and they don't have to pay impact fees. That's what I keep coming back to. There's an ocean of money coming into Cape Canaveral, and we're not tapped into it in any way, shape, or form yet. So let's get smart, and let's ask for some of it.
Hotels pay a bed tax.
Yeah, we're going to collect that too. The rental unit has to collect vacation and bed tax.
Do we know what that is compared to that bed tax that hotels pay?
Same tax.
Is it the same
I
tax?
believe so.
Same amount? 5%.
I think the only other item left of the 5 is the requirement for a annual, or not the requirement, excuse me, we've already gone through this, is I think there was two triggers. We could require it, is the annual inspection, the need for inspection.
Yeah, that's
So-
where I keep coming back to, if you're gonna do an annual inspection, you got one a day, every day,
Yeah,
for 400 units.
What was the intention? What were they hoping to gain by that?
well, the ordinance is worded that to gauge compliance with the ordinance requirements. So, for example, if the owner by the ordinance is required to post informational stuff up in the unit, that would be part of the inspection to see if it is in a conspicuous location as the ordinance requires. Do they have the necessary, I don't know, Anthony, I'm treading on deep water here, but perhaps we could look for light safety issues.
The criteria for annual inspection are delineated on page 12 and 16. They're gonna be looking for compliance with Florida Building Code,
Yep.
fire and life
Fire
safety
safety
code,
issues.
maintenance, code enforcement violations, code maintenance and violations, stuff like that.
Like we have
Make sure these people are living in a safe house.
right, we have an international property maintenance code too, our IPMC, that sets out a lot of different standards for residential. So we'd be looking for things in our codes, so code compliance.
Yes,
I think the way that would practically work, why I think this is a good inclusion, is we're getting these compliance reports, and let's say there's customer reviews about the condition of the vacation rental. Perhaps it's flea infested bed bugs, roaches, no screens on the windows, there's a problem with the ceilings falling down. The complaints perhaps could come in that if you don't have a mechanism by which to inspect, you can't compare them. But if each registrant understands and signs agrees, they have to have somebody available and have ability or city code requires that the city can inspect annually or as needed. The door is open for us to have that inspection if we need to.
So you're not saying that absolutely there's an inspection every year,
It's practical.
just,
It's not a
Just-
shall.
just as needed.
This is as needed.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
It helps against let's say there was slum lord on it.
Yeah.
We'll take you out there on it, money to people and things down the slum. But just in case there's a problem, it helps us get in there and take place.
I like that.
I agree with the as needed. I don't. You said it's worded that it's as needed in here, but everything I read, it seemed like it was a requirement annually. So I don't know, maybe just double check the
I
words.
think it's that, as may be requested.
Okay.
So that's as needed.
And then, so it's both.
I agree. That was a good discussion about that. Thank you. Thank you all. I think we've sort of discussed everything, sort of, lightly, if not deeply. Let's ask for a delay. And we'll come back and we're going to talk through here and this will give us time to let this settle down. I'm like Susan, I'm just sifting through a ton of data. And I expected to. I expect I'm going to get a lot of input tonight to sift through. I don't mind doing that. But it's going to take me a little time just to settle all that through and come up with what I'm willing to recommend.
Yeah, and I think that'll give Anthony and staff an opportunity to maybe chew on it as well, and maybe come up with some proposed language for the board to consider at the next time we get together.
I like the time, us having the extra time to think about it, because we have a lot riding on our shoulders on this, because this is a very hot topic in most neighborhoods. And I think we owe it to everyone to take our time to make these decisions.
That's true. We owe it to our neighbors to do good, do this well. Okay, David, what else do we need to do tonight? Other than Put a
Anthony,
motion on the floor asking for a delay.
yeah, okay, I think that
I would recommend a motion to postpone, making a recommendation until the planning and zoning board's next meeting. And we'll take that.
Mr. Chairman, John Price, I'd like to make a recommendation that we postpone any decisions made until we've had a chance to discuss this further at our next P&Z meeting.
Michael Miller, I second that.
Okay, I thank you all for that motion. Call the roll, please.
Chairman Russell,
I'm for the motion.
Vice Chair Price,
For the motion.
Board Member Denny,
Board motion.
Board Member Stroud,
For the motion.
Board Member Dr. Miller,
For the motion.
and Board Member Ms. Gentle Core.
For the motion.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you all for your participation.
Do you
I'm
need to
really
ask about the
gratified
phone?
by your input, attention. This board, once I saw the lineup, once we started forming it, the way it's turned out with the different talents, I started to feel like this is going to be a good board. It's going to be a really excellent board. A lot of good is going to come out of it. So I thank you for your participation. I'm proud of you as a board and look forward to working through some more of this stuff next time we meet. So when do we want to meet again? Do you have any idea, Dave?
Typically, this board meets the second or the fourth Wednesday of every month. So,
Well,
You know,
let's put it this way, just schedule us up a next meeting.
it'll probably be the fourth Wednesday of next month.
Okay, put it
All
out
right.
on the.
Ms. Denny, did you have a question for the chairman?
Did we need to ask about the remote users? Did the public comment or
Yes,
are we
ma'am.
just adjourned?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, we're hearing no indications of input from the internet. Anybody else? Okay, any police reports or advice for this subject? Okay, I understand. All right, let's hear a motion to adjourn.
Chairman, John Price, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Susan Denny seconds it.
All
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? None. We're adjourned.